So when you want to draw or transfer out these shapes onto your paper, you have two options depending on how dark of a value the paper is. This is almost a mid-tone, so I would kind of go either way on this one. And with your commercial papers, you're always going to have probably a toothier side and a smoother side. This one's pretty comparable. It's the Murano paper, because most of them are pastel chalk or charcoal papers, and they're meant to hold the media. So you want to make sure which side you're on. You also want to make sure, because some of them have a watermark kind of embossed on the paper, and I've done that many times, cut it out and then found out I have this embossing. So you want to avoid that. And you see I have weird shapes because what I'm going to do is put down where I want it and then glue it just in a certain spot, so that I have the bulk of the paper for other things down the road. You could make your 2-ply sheets by gluing 2 sheets together right from the get-go. It really doesn't matter. It's just, I feel like this gives me some more options down the road. So on the tracing paper, you traced your shapes with graphite, a pencil, and so it's really easy because we're just going to turn it over and go back over those lines. We don't need to have graphite paper. You could use a graphite transfer paper, but I find this is a lot easier. I tend to forget what I'm doing, so I literally am now writing right, meaning the correct side, on here because I'll forget. If you're doing the same color paper, it's not necessarily a big deal if you mix up which way you're doing, because we're going to be working mirrored. And so some people are very concerned about the grain of the paper. I haven't ever found that it really matters, and so I just kind of try and maximize my space usage because I'm cheap and I want to save the paper. My preference is to always go back over with a colored ballpoint pen. It helps me see where I've been, and but that's just my own way of working. So, and I'm just going to go back over the lines here, and because you're only going on where that graphite line already was, if you're not real exact, it won't matter because it doesn't really show up. And it's not too big of a deal if it actually indents the paper while you're drawing on it, because we're going to be cutting and shaping it so much. Sometimes those indentations are helpful. And I'm going back over all the lines I've drawn. Some of them are just landmarks for me, so that when we go forward and start embossing and stuff, I have those lines already drawn, knowing where to, make higher and lower places. And I'm ignoring the toenail because I am going to draw that as a separate piece. And with the graphite like this, it's nice because I can see where I've been, so I can kind of shimmy up the other foot. The other method where we're going to use the white transfer paper, you don't have that luxury, so you kind of have to adjust for that a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and trace out one. Sometimes you'll trace out multiple depending on your project, but in this case, each piece is unique. So I'm just going to trace out one of each of the shapes that I've drawn. And sometimes I'll just check to make sure the line is good, and I'll just touch it up so that down the road, if I leave the piece for a little bit and the shapes aren't fresh in my head, I know where to go. So usually when I've done a big piece, I'll go back and just double check where I've been, and I'll put the pieces that go together, I usually kind of keep them together. Sometimes when you've got lots and lots of little pieces of one image going, I'll paper clip them together as we go, just so that I can keep track of what goes where and with what piece. Because you would think they would all be the same, or that it would make sense, but it ends up not. Once you've got lots and lots of little pieces. I'm going to go ahead and trace out the toenails. I haven't fully decided. Sometimes I don't decide till I'm actually in the process if I'm going to emboss them or use them. But it's much easier to already have them and decide not to use them than to try and go back and maybe you don't have enough paper the right color or something now. And so I will just, oh, I still have that toenail. And usually you have a little scrap around the edges that's going to be 2-ply, and so if you missed a little section or something, it's not a big deal. So it looks like we have the big shapes. I just noticed that I didn't get those landmarks on this one, so I'm going to put it back because I want to make sure I've got those in place, just the ankle bone and some of the folds. And then once I've done that, I cut it not to the actual pieces. I used to do that, and that's crazy because then you just cut it out twice and there's no reason. And I end up using the scraps for different things. I tend to kind of have pre-arthritic hands, and so wherever possible, I try and have tricks that save my hands. And one of them is, once I've traced it like this, rather than cut out the individual pieces and glue it down, I cut out around the big shape, and then I'm going to spray glue it and I'll put it down on here. But I like to do that all at once with all the pieces that I have for the papers I'm working on right then, just for efficiency's sake.